Well, hello, my fellow Cougars. This video is for anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about the Chrome Canvas drawing program. The good news is that Chrome Canvas is already loaded on every Chromebook. At least that's what Anne Langlois told me. And I call her Anna the Abacus Langlois because, well, you can count on her. So if Anne Langlois says it, you know it's true. The only issue is how to access Chrome Canvas because it doesn't appear as an icon in the bottom of our Chromebook screen. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to our Google machines and we're going to type in Chrome Canvas. So let's do that now. Well, like I said, we're going to go to Google and we're going to type in Chrome Canvas. And the very top result should be what we want to click on. And it will take us to the program that, like I said earlier, Anna has informed me, is already on every Chromebook. We're going to click on New Drawing because that's what we're going to create. And it takes us right to our blank paper or canvas. If you look towards the left, you see that there's various icons. On the bottom, there's an eraser, then chalk, a marker, a pen, a pencil, and towards the top, this is the color selection. And this little pencil and triangle shows you how large the pen tip or marker tip or whatever tip you're working with is going to be, and also the opacity or transparency. So I'll begin with a pencil. This is the pen. This is the chalk. And finally the marker. And as I said, the icons towards the left on the top indicate the color. So I'll change the color to green, and I can also change the size, making it very large, or all the way down to a 1, and the opacity. So I'll put it right in the middle, and I'll make it much more transparent. So I can make my marker or my pen somewhat transparent or completely opaque, so it covers up everything. Now I don't want any of this stuff, so the two little arrows that you see up towards the top are the undo. This way I'm going to get everything and begin my illustration. The section over here shows layers and background. So if I click on the little triangle or the little diamond up towards the top right hand corner, it shows me layers and the background. So I'm going to start with my background, and here's my palette, and I'm going to start with an orange palette and the orange background because I'm going to do a nice little sunset. And I'm going to click out of this and start working on my sky. I want to add a reddish hue, so if I go to the top left, this picks out my colors, and I'm going to go towards the red, which is not right at the bottom, but the color just above that. Here's my red. Instead of using marker, I'm going to try chalk to give it a little bit of texture, and I'm going to vary the size and again the transparency as I move the opacity indicator left and right. You can see that it becomes transparent or opaque. I'll put it right about in the middle, see how that looks, and I'll begin right towards the top. I'm going to go all the way across, and you can go nice and slowly if you want. If I end up going a little bit too fast, you can always pause or rewind, or if you want, you can just watch at this point and come back and work on your own a little bit later. The nice thing about the transparency is if I go over it several times, like I'm doing towards the top, I can make it a little less transparent each time. So there's my orange sky that's gradually fading. And if it gets a little bit too sudden right at the bottom, I can always go back to my original color, which is orange. Here's the orange. And if I just take the orange chalk and cover up a little bit of the red, which is what I'm doing at the bottom, it softens that transition a little bit. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I'm being a little bit nitpicky. But again, I'm just trying to show you all the different things that this program can do, even though, to be honest, I'm learning myself. Well, I have a nice little hazy sunset sky, but I'm going to add a sun to it. And I could just take some yellow and white and add a sun, but I want to experiment a little bit with the layers, so I'm going to go all the way to the right, and I'm going to click on that icon. And where it says layers, if you look, I can add a layer. So here's my original layer that has the orange and the red. There's my background on the bottom, and right here is my new layer. So if I click on my new layer, then go to my picture, I'm going to pick out a new color, yellow, for my sun. So here's some yellow, and I'm going to, this time I'll try marker. And I want the opacity or the transparency to be all the way down to maybe about a 15 or a 10, somewhere in between there. And the size, we'll say maybe about a 30. And I'm going to put my sun right in the middle. And I'm going to go over it several times in the middle. And as I get towards the outside, I'm just going to do it 1 or 2 times because I want to have it gradually fade into the rest of the picture. Now it's nice and bright in the center and a little bit more faded towards the outside, but I want to have it even brighter. So I'm going to go back into my color up on the top left-hand corner, and I'm going to go with white. And I'm going to put a nice bright center to my sun. And now it's very bright in the center and a little bit more faded towards the edges. Now the reason I did this on layers is because if I go back to my layer icon in the top right-hand corner and I click on that, if you look at the sun layer, there's an indicator that shows arrows to the left and right and so on. So I'm going to click on that, and I've decided I don't want my sun right in the middle of the picture because that's a little bit boring. So I'm going to move my sun a little bit over to the right. And I like that much better. Well, at this point, you may be saying, that's it. I'm good. I'll take it from here on my own. I'm going to just putter around with the different brush sizes and colors and opacity and layering, create my own illustration. And if you want to do that, that's just fine. In fact, if you want to tap out completely because you're afraid you may be missing out on what's been happening in the world of TikTok for the last 7 minutes, I guess that's up to you too. Don't worry about me or my feelings. But if you're feeling a little bit of that Bob Ross vibe and you want to maybe work on a guided illustration together, some happy mountains and a happy little forest, well, we can give that a shot together too and see what we come up with. Now, I've noticed that a lot of my young artists, when they draw mountains, they tend to draw mountains that look very cartoony. They go way up and way down and way up and way down like this. Okay, and they tend to look very cartoony and fake. Or sometimes they draw mountains that are very rounded like this. Actually, if you look at the mountains, particularly the Adirondack Mountains around here, they tend to be not so much rounded, but straight up, straight down. And instead of going way up and way down, if you just think of them as hills, you go up a little bit, down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit. They're more like hills. They're actually mountains that most people can walk along. Okay, so instead of mountains that go like this or like this, we're going to draw mountains that do a little bit more like this. Okay, a little bit more like this shape, kind of like I said, big hills. So I'm going to undo all this doodling that I've done and get started. I clicked on one too many icons, so I'm going to put my sun back where I wanted it. And I'm going to pick out my color. So up toward the top left, here's my color palette. And I don't have brown for the mountain, so I'm going to pick orange. And I want to change the color a little bit. So if the color that I want is not indicated on this basic palette, I'm going to go to custom and click on that. And if I move this icon around, you can see how I can have an intense orange or a light orange or a dark orange, which turns almost brown, and that's what I want. So I'm going to take my circle and I'm going to move it down about 1/3 of the way. Okay, if this is halfway, I'm going to come down about a third of the way. Now I may decide I want a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, but I'm going to try this and see how it looks. I'm going to use my marker again. I want the mountains to be completely opaque, not see through at all. And I'm going to have them set around 30, maybe 35, somewhere in there. And I'll start just next to my sun. And again, I'm not going to go way up and way down, way up and way down. I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to go right down to the corner. And then down to this corner. I'll fill it in. And I have a basic mountain shape. Of course, this is pretty boring. Mountains don't have just one peak. And rather than have them point way up and way down like a witch's hat or a cone, I'm going to go up just a little bit. So if you can imagine I'm skiing, I'm going to make the size a little bit smaller. If you can imagine that I'm skiing down this mountain, and I go up just a little bit, and then down. Up a little bit, and then down. Up a little bit, down, and maybe up. That's all I need to do. And that's a fairly realistic mountain shape. I can make my main peak a little bit higher if I want to, but I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come down, then maybe up a little bit, down, up just a little bit, down, and up just a little bit. Okay, now I could leave my mountains just like this and there'd be nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to do a couple different things. One thing is I want to have a little bit of this sun glow softening the edge of my mountain. So I'm going to go back to my color, and I'm going to take that yellow that I worked with earlier and my marker, and this time again I want it to be very, very soft, maybe only about a 10 to 15. And I'm going to add a little bit of that glow. If you can see what I'm doing to my sun, I'm putting just a little bit of glow. I'm going to make it even more transparent towards the outside. A little bit of glow around the edge of the mountain. Not too much, because you don't want to make it look like the sun is in front of the mountain, but I'm just softening that edge just a little bit. I'm going to draw another row of mountains just to make it look a little bit more realistic, a little bit more depth, a little bit more detail. And I could just take my brown and make a darker layer right here, but I'm going to use my layers. I'm going to add a new layer. And with my new layer, I'm going to start drawing. I'll go back to my colors. Here's my color palette. If you look towards the bottom, this color right here is the same color that I just used. So I'll start with this brown, and I'm going to darken it just a little bit. So if this is about a third of the way down, I'm going to come down about halfway. So it's going to be the same color that I just used, but it's a little bit darker. We'll see how this looks. Oh, the color is dark enough, but my transparency is still set at almost transparent. And now you can see that it's much darker. In fact, that's a little bit darker than I want, so I'm going to erase this. And I can either lighten the color or make it a little bit more transparent. Let's see if this works. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. Now, I don't want to have a row of mountains that is exactly the same as the row of mountains that I just had, because for one thing, that's boring. Also, it's very unrealistic. Mountains are much more random than that. So I'm not going to have my second row of mountains in the same shape as my first set. So the rule that I'm going to keep in mind, again, there aren't any real rules for mountains, is that if I have a mountain peak, I'm going to make that a valley right next to it. And any place that I have a peak, I'm going to turn it into a mountain. You can see how right here, there's a mountain valley right there, so I'm going to make that a peak. At least I'm going to do enough so that my new mountains don't have the same exact shape as my old mountains. And I'm just going to color this in using my marker. And I like these mountains but I don't like the fact that they cover too much of my original mountain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the layer button again, and I'm going to hit the arrow indicator. And when I do that, I can take the mountains that I just drew and I can move them down just a little bit. Not too much, just a little bit. And now it's done. Well, we're almost at the finish line, but what kind of a landscape would it be if we didn't have a row of happy trees? So let's add those now. Well, I'm going to make my trees very, very dark because they're basically silhouettes. So of course I'm going to pick green, but I'm going to go to my custom colors and move it almost all the way to the bottom. I'm going to use my marker, and this time I want to have the opacity at 100 and the size all the way down to 1. Now I could just add my trees like this. The problem with that is that if I decide I want to erase something, I'll use my eraser right here. If I erase, well, I also erase part of the mountains that I just drew, so I don't want to do that. I'm going to create one more layer. Now this time, if I draw something and I don't like my tree, I can erase my tree and it won't touch any of the other layers. So that gives me a lot more freedom to experiment a little bit because I don't have to worry about undoing everything that I've already done. I already have my color selected. I already have my size selected. I'm going to go to my marker, and I'm going to start right in the middle, and I'm going to have a tree that goes up maybe about a quarter of the way, and I'll have it come straight down. Then I'm going to go all the way near the edge of my paper, and I'm going to go all the way up maybe about 3/4 of the way. In between the two, I'll have a tree that's somewhere between the first and the second. And then between these, there's another set of trees, maybe one more little one right here. So I want my trees to gradually get larger towards the edge of my paper, but not so uniform that they look like telephone poles. They get gradually larger, but I vary the size a little bit. Now, when I draw the size of the trees or the shape of the trees, I'm going to switch to my pencil because it doesn't show up as much. And I want to keep my trees very, very skinny. I can always make them wider. If I go like this and I make my trees too wide, well, I can't make them smaller. But if I make them skinny, I can always go back and make them wider. So I'm going to make each of my trees tall and skinny like a cone. And I'm using my pencil because, again, I can see these pencil lines, but they don't show up too much. Once I have the basic shape, I'm going to go back to my marker and scribble. Those of you who like to scribble, well, this should be the best part of the drawing for you. I want to keep the top, in fact, I don't like what I just did. I want to keep the top very, very skinny. And I want to stay inside that basic triangle that I just made. Well, if I leave it like this, it doesn't look very real because trees don't have branches that all go in the same direction. So I'm going to establish the basic shape. Maybe I'll put another little tree right there. But since I promised we could scribble, I'm going to go back and cover up some of those big open spaces. Have some of the branches coming out a little bit farther than others, because branches are very random and imperfect, and that's what we're going for. But again, we want to have the top of our trees very, very small. Our branches would look a little bit more realistic if they were a little bit thinner. So maybe I'll try a pen and see how this looks. Okay, and smaller branches, especially towards the outside, will look more real. It's a little bit more time consuming, so maybe I won't put as much time into this right now as I would if I were working on my own. But you can decide for yourself if you think it looks better with these tiny little branches. And because I'm having so much fun drawing these branches, I'm going to put another set of trees on the right edge of my picture. Not only because it's fun to draw the trees, but it gives my picture a little bit better balance. So again, I'm keeping them very skinny. If my tree is too skinny, well, I can always make it wider. But once I make it too wide, I'm kind of stuck with it, unless, of course, I decide to undo or erase. Now I could leave my trees just like this and there'd be nothing wrong with that. I'm going to add just a little bit of highlight because these are maybe a little bit darker than I want. So I'm going to go back to my color setting, my color palette up towards the top, and I'm going to make that green just a little bit lighter, and we'll see how this looks. I'll start here on the right edge, and I'm adding a little bit. Again, I'm just scribbling. I'm just making the trees a little bit more colorful, even though they're still basically silhouettes. Just scribbling a little bit. And I think in order to make it look more realistic, I would come back into my pen, because the pen makes lines that are not quite as thick. And as I work on these little details right here, I think we are just about finished. With our happy little trees and our friendly little sky. Well, I hope you find this video helpful, at least in terms of becoming more familiar with Chrome Canvas and the various features it has. I hope it's something you can use in your classroom. I also hope it's something that you can use for your own entertainment as a creative outlet. And as you're puttering around with your own illustrations, if you learn any little tricks or tips that I haven't covered, well, please feel free to share those. Feel free to share your own illustrations, unless they're better than mine, in which case you shouldn't be sharing them with me or anyone else. But for now, I'll just say good luck with your own creative endeavors, and thanks for joining me.